you for making it to today's event, Exploring Mental Health and LGBTQ plus API Youth. This event is brought to you by Project Lotus, which is a completely youth-led organization dedicated to destigmatizing mental health in the AAPI community. And we really wanted to provide this event because AAPI youth often face very unique experiences in how it relates to their identity and mental health. And being queer can also add these compounded challenges to deal with. Because of that, we wanted to offer this webinar, start having these conversations around these topics, and we hope this will be helpful. Hope you all are having a great evening or afternoon, wherever you are. Today, we'll just be going over a quick introduction to the webinar and Project Lotus, the people kind of behind this event, as well as getting into our keynote presentation with our amazing speaker today, as well as hearing from some student panelists to hear their experiences, share their story, and just get that conversation going around this topic. At the end, we'll open up to a Q&A if you'd like to ask questions. And considering today we have a little more intimate of an audience, we might even consider just, if you want to raise your hand to unmute and ask a question, or maybe promote people to be able to ask questions through voice, we can totally do that. If you have any questions and you'd like to send them either through chat or through unmuting, please feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And that's how we can get to your questions. It's just a little difficult for us to get to those questions if they're in the chat. So please do be sure to use that. But if I can get the next slide, please. Awesome. So just a little bit of background for those of you who have been to our events in the past. You've heard this a couple times, so I'll keep it a little brief for people who are new to these events. This webinar is presented by Project Lotus. Like I said, it's a completely youth-led organization that's destigmatizing mental health in the API community. This event is actually youth-led. My name is Daniel Gu. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Project Lotus. I'm a rising senior in high school, and I'm joined by, if the team also wants to turn on their cameras, an amazing team of youth who put together this event. So Chloe and Josh, if you want to say hello to the audience. Yeah, so as I said, our organization is completely youth-led, and what we really focus on is mental health in the API community and those unique experiences, unique cultural differences, and unique, the position we're in with stigma in our community and how we talk about and support mental health. These webinars are free, culturally relevant, and are just one of the things we offer to the community. These are once a month. If you're actually interested in checking out our past webinars, those are all recorded on our website, www.theprojectlotus.org, where you can watch the recordings. But we also have other resources, such as just educational resources in general, the resources that we spread on our website, as well as our social media, and other programs really just meant to get the conversation going to destigmatize mental health. If you're interested in any of these, as I said, please check out our website. You can also email us at info@contactprojectlotus.org to reach our main communications. If you have questions, comments, feedback about these events, or just want to get more involved with us. We do, we have positions open for any youth that want to join our central team. We're also always trying to branch out and tackle this issue holistically. So even though we're youth-led, we try our best to work with as many adults, professionals as possible. If you're, fit that, if you fit that demographic and you'd like to get involved, we have forms on our website, and you can also just shoot us an introduction through our email. Lastly, we do have some community spaces for people to be in community and support with one another. One of those is our community WeChat. We put this up for all our events, but I'll leave that up for a second if you want to screenshot that QR code. This is a WeChat space, primarily parents. So if there's any youth in the audience, I don't know if you enjoy being in this group, but it's primarily parents who really just get to discuss mental health, the API experience, and be in community with one another. So go ahead and screenshot if you're interested. I'll also put that up at the end of this event. In addition, if you're a youth looking for some support spaces, Josh, if you could drop the Discord server link into the chat, that'd be amazing. But this is just kind of a youth space for you to get involved. So just as youth, you might not be that interested in the parent WeChat. Parents might not be the place for you. But youth, this is a great place just to kind of join some of Project Lotus events. And, like I said, just be in community with other youth who get what it's like to be AAPI. But with that, I want to not take any more time from our speakers and panelists today. So I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for the day. So next slide, please. Our speaker is Ren Lee. Ren is a psychotherapist and social worker based in NYC, specializing in working with the LGBTQIA plus community and BIPOC around issues of grief and loss, trauma, transitions, and relationships. They focus on intersectional identities of race, gender, sexuality, and disability. He practices from feminist, relational, and psychodynamic perspectives and believes in community care, liberation, growth, joy, healing, and justice. So thank you so much, Ren, for being able to speak for us. And I'd like to pass the mic off to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Cool. Thank you, Project. So I'm going to talk about LGBTQ. I know Project Lotus just introduced me, but I'm going to also talk a bit more about who I am, what I do. I'm going to go over what is gender, what is sexuality, some of the basics of it, talk about, coming out and how to respond or how not to respond, and then resources, because you all deserve resources. And before I dive in, I'm going to say that I'm going to try my best to go over the information. I have about like half an hour, and so this is being recorded, and I'm going to share my slides, Project Lotus, to share with you. So don't worry if you can't write down everything and whatnot. And I encourage you to use a chat or the Q&A later, and I will get to them when I can. So yeah, so a little bit about me. My name is Ren. I am a licensed master social work based in Lenape-Hoking, otherwise known as Colonial New York City. And I identify as a queer, transgender, and non-binary, second generation Chinese American. And so I currently work as like a psychotherapist here in New York. Like I said, I work primarily with the LGBTQIA plus community and BIPOC. And I also put this here because I also want to name that sort of like where I am coming from and sort of the intersection that I am like practicing from as well. So to start off, like, what is gender and what is sexuality? Because they're two separate things. I have pretty broad definitions of like what they are, and I'm gonna like talk a little bit more about them as well. So gender is just sort of like someone's personal sense of sort of who they are and how they identify with the gender. Gender is also a social construct based on characteristics that how we as a society or a culture define femininity, masculinity, androgyny, etc., and how we assign them to like womanhood or manhood. Whereas sexuality or like sexual orientation is how someone is attracted or not to another person and someone's identity in the relationship which the gender or genders they are typically attracted to. So I'm gonna talk more about like gender and then touch about sexuality and then move from there. So how do we understand gender? We're all born as a baby, and then we're assigned a gender based on how our genitals look, right? Baby is born in the hospital, wherever, and then we associate like the baby has a vagina, we call it a girl, or we say it's female. The baby has a penis, and it's like a boy or a male, right? And then that baby is then assigned female or male at birth. So the terminology that I'm going to be using is AFAB or AMAB. And then we put that on their birth certificate, the medical records, driver's license, passport, and other forms of ID in the future. So naming that like female and male, the binary genders, which we like typically associate gender with. Also naming that sometimes babies are born with like ambiguous genitalia, which can mean that they are intersex. So they're the I is the intersex in LGBTQIA+. And so the babies are often like operated on to quote unquote fix it, sometimes with, sometimes without parental consent, but this often causes complications, such as sterilization, body issues, and many other things. It's not just based on genitalia that babies are intersex, but that some intersex people have various internal organs and have different sex chromosomes that aren't the typical XX or XY. And so I definitely just want to name that for folks, and intersex people can have a variety of genders and sexualities that they identify with. So talk about like some gender definitions. So when we say someone is cisgender or cis, that means the gender that they were assigned with and the gender that they identify with are the same. So for example, someone who is AFAB or assigned female at birth and still identifies as a woman is cisgender. So we say she is a cis woman. Someone who is transgender or trans, right? So someone whose gender does not align with the one they were assigned at birth. For example, someone is AMAB or assigned male at birth and identifies as a woman is transgender. So we say she is a trans woman. And then we say people who are non-binary are people whose gender is not entirely male or female. And so they can be either AFAB or AMAB and still be non-binary. And so non-binary people can fall under the transgender sort of umbrella and category because their gender does not align with the one they were assigned with at birth, but not everyone identifies this way. So the best thing to do is just to ask how people identify and what it means for them. So sort of expanding gender definitions and naming that this is only a fraction of what's out there. So maybe you've heard of terms like gender fluid. So someone whose gender is sort of fluid and fluctuates. And this person can be like female, male, neutral, a mix of both, neither, etc. And someone who's agender is someone who doesn't have a gender. And then you might see like more terms such as transgender and gender expansive or gender nonconforming. And I say gender expansive because sort of our understanding and the way we like view and understand gender has been expanding over the years. And gender nonconforming is someone who doesn't stereotypically conform to the way we expect or like understand gender. And so there are a lot of terms and labels. Some of them you may have seen or heard about or haven't, which is fine. Like androgen, like demigirl or demiboy, genderqueer. There are also culturally specific genders, such as hijra, which is, in South Asian cultures. We have two-spirit people who are in indigenous cultures, and how colonialism has impacted the way we view and see gender, and how now we see in a very like gender binary. So when we think about gender, we also think about like pronouns, because pronouns are the way we refer to other people. So common ones in the English language are she, her, which we typically associate with women, he, him, that we typically associate with men, and they, them, if we aren't sure about people's genders or if someone is non-binary. I do want to name that people who are non-binary use a mix of pronouns. And other pronouns, which maybe you've seen or heard, include like ze here, ze them, they fair, etc. And these are called neopronouns. And so it's really important to respect when someone asks for you to use certain pronouns with them. And so some people use multiple pronouns. For me, for example, so I use both they and he pronouns. And I like it when people sort of mix it up. It feels really affirming and supportive to me. And meanwhile, some people don't use any pronouns. And I also understand that like it can take time to get used to someone's new pronouns, especially if you're sort of used to calling someone a certain way for most of their life or most of your life. But it means a lot, right? When you use their correct pronouns, and not just their pronouns, but their names. And the only way you get good at it is if you practice doing it. And if you mess up, that's okay. You just do a quick apology, you correct yourself, and then you move on. So moving into sexuality and sexual orientation, also naming that this is fluid like gender, and that these are very like brief and general descriptions. So the L in LGBTQIA+, lesbian. So we typically refer it to as women who like women. I put a little asterisk because it's also a political identity based on people's experiences. I'm gonna go super into this, but just sort of naming that for what it is. Gay, so typically we say like men who like men, or alternatively, someone who likes someone of the same gender. Bisexual, someone likes two or more genders. Queer is also like an umbrella term to mean someone who is not cisgender and or heterosexual / straight. So queer is someone who is not cisgender and or straight. And then asexual is someone who may not experience sexual attraction to others. And this is also across the spectrum. And there's like a lot of different labels that someone can use. So like I said before, the best way is just sort of ask someone how they identify and what it means for them, if they want to share, that is. And so how do we think and talk about LGBTQIA+ people? What do we see in the media and how do we react, right? I also want to name that I'm going to say queer and trans primarily instead of LGBTQIA+, just because it's simpler. Right? So whenever like a child, a peer, or a loved one, like before they even come out, they're like trying to figure out themselves, right? And they're listening and they're learning how you speak about and how you act around like queer and trans people. And they also see a lot of messages from TV, movies, books, the news, right? And how you are reacting to them. And we think about like, how are they being represented? How are queer and trans people being represented, right? And so sort of like, what do they learn from all these messaging from the world, from society, and all these things around them, right? A lot of times they learn that queer and trans people are like weird or not normal, that they don't belong, or they don't deserve to be treated respect, and that their identity is a joke to a lot of people. And so when you sort of hear these messaging, right, like it doesn't feel good. And so obviously this all has like impacts on their mental health and increases anxiety, depression, possible other mental illnesses, and also increases the risk of self-harm, suicidality, disordered eating, and substance abuse, right? And so thinking about queer and trans API mental health, right? And honestly, there's not enough research out there. And that's partly because Asian, American, Pacific Islander encompass so many different ethnicities and cultures. My experience as a queer and trans person, as a light-skinned Chinese person, is going to be very different from someone who's like a dark-skinned Bangladeshi person, for example. Um, However, there is some research out there, and so Gleason and Incapia. So Gleason is an organization in the United States that focuses on research and supporting LGBTQ youth. And then Incapia is a national queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance that is an organization that connects like queer API together. And so they released a report in 2020 interviewing about 1,500, queer and trans API youth, and over half of them, so almost 52%, felt unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation. About 41% felt unsafe because of their gender expression. About almost 26.5% because of their race or ethnicity. And if you think about, as API, we will experience racism. As queer and trans people, we will experience queerphobia, homophobia, transphobia. And then as the intersection of queer and trans API, we will experience both. So the impact on our mental health will be compounded, right? And so we live in a world that doesn't feel safe for us, right? That we're being told that like we're not normal, that we aren't the people that are represented in media. And so this multiplies based on our identities. And this is multiplied even more if you have a disability, depending on your religion, all the other factors of someone's identity. So of course, this increases our risk for like anxiety, depression, other mental illnesses. So some statistics. So Gleason, which is an organization that focuses on research for queer and trans youth, reports that about 60% have reported being harassed or assaulted at school and having lower self-esteem and school belonging, as well as high levels of depression and emotional distress. The CDC shares that LGBTQI youth and young adults, so typically up to the age about 24, we consider in this demographic, have 120% higher risk of experiencing homelessness, often the result of family rejection or discrimination based on their gender or sexuality. According to CDC, LGBTQ high school students are more than 4 times as likely to have attempted suicide compared to their straight peers. So these are all some pretty grim statistics. And so obviously you will have worries, fears, and concerns, right? For your child and for your loved one. And maybe some of the questions you asked is, will my child be happy and safe? What if they are discriminated against? How does this affect on me as a parent, a friend, or a peer? Do I hold shame and embarrassment because of my connection to this queer and trans person? Why is that? And what stigmas are coming up for me? Maybe asking like, can they have a family? Will I get grandchildren? Who will take care of them when they get older, right? And so these are all really good questions and really good concerns to have, right? You can't guarantee that your child will be happy and safe 100% of the time. That's just not real, and that you can do your best to support them, right? And asking like, what if they are discriminated against? Thankfully, we sort of live in a time where there are more protections in laws and policies to protect queer and trans people. And even if they are discriminated against, it's important to have a good social network with friends, family, and loved ones that can support them if that happens to them. I'm gonna leave this question alone. How does it reflect on me to sort of, have your own self-reflection on that. But it ties into sort of, do you hold shame and embarrassment if like someone you know is queer or is trans, right? Because what they're learning is also like if you're embarrassed about them, then maybe they should be embarrassed about themselves. And that is not a good message to have. It's not a good message to learn. And that really impacts, you know, their own mental health. And then thinking like, can they have a family? Yes, they can. Do they want to have a family? Another question in itself. Um, will I get grandchildren? Like, who will take care of them? You know, they will have friends, they will have family, whether it's blood or not, to help take care of them when they get older, right? And I think I'm asking all this is, are you asking these questions based on what you think is best for your child? Or are you trying to listen to them about what they know about themselves and what they want for themselves, right? And part of it is also like, can they make informed decisions about their life, their body, their relationships? And how can they learn to do that if they don't get the chance to do that, right? Because you can't do everything for them, but what you can do is you can be there to support them. I think it's also really important to name like how amazing it is to like sort of be able to figure out a part of yourself at a young age, because we often push like ourselves or children to like figure out what they want to do in life, whether that is like how to make money, what career path are you going down, like are you going to find a partner, will you marry them, will you have children, can you afford a house, like et cetera, right? And honestly, people struggle throughout their lifetime to make sense of who they are and where they fit in the world. I work primarily with adults, but it is among a range of ages. People I've worked as young as like early 20s, working through college and sort of transitioning out of that, to people all the way in their 70s. And across all these ages, people are figuring themselves out. People are trying to like make sense of who they are. And like people are coming out in all stages of their life, right? And that must be like really scary and honestly like really incredible to be able to like figure out stuff about yourself, right? And to have the courage and strength to share that with the people you love or to the world, especially when the world is a place that often tells us that like we don't belong or that we shouldn't be having this. I also want to name that it's okay if you or your child like changes your identity later on in life, because we're always evolving as human beings and how we grow and move through the world, right? If you come out at 15 as bisexual and then at age 29 you're like, actually I'm a lesbian, and then at age 40 you're like, actually I'm a straight trans man, good for you. Good for you for trying to figure that out, because people struggle to figure that out all the time. Um, Some more statistics. According to the HRC, which is the Human Rights Campaign, so family acceptance promotes better self-esteem and better general health. And that family support protects against thoughts of and attempts of suicide, substance abuse, and STIs. Research says that youth who reported high levels of family acceptance were 2/3 less likely to report suicide ideation and suicide compared to those with low family acceptance. And that trans youth who are able to use their chosen name at home, school, work, with friends had a 56% decrease in suicidal behavior. All this to say, when people are supported and affirmed by the people they love, the people around them, that their mental health and well-being is so much better. So how do we respond when someone comes out, right? I think the question is like, what do you want to tell your loved one? Do you want to tell them that you love them and that you support them, or that you think they're wrong about themselves and they shouldn't be talking about it, right? Is your response out of love, care, and support, or is it more out of like fear, worry, and shame? Remember, it is really scary to come out, and they're coming out because a part of them is trusting you to be able to support them, to love them, right? When it's really scary and they're coming out to you, that means they are trusting you. And so what are some ways to sort of show the support? You can say, thank you for sharing this important detail about yourself to me. That must have taken a lot of courage to tell me. I love you and I support you and I want you to be happy and comfortable. And I think really importantly, asking, how can I support you? What do I need to do or change to support you? Some more responses. Some things to not say or do. Don't ignore it. Don't pretend they never shared. Don't tell them it's a phase or try convincing them that they're wrong. What you're telling them in these responses is that they can't be themselves, that you don't want them to be themselves, and that they need to change so that you feel comfortable and that they can't feel comfortable, right? And then don't isolate them from friends and people around them, and don't blame their mental illness, disability if they have one. Don't blame other people for quote unquote influencing them. The reason they are connecting with other queer and trans people is because there's a connection there, that they're seeing something that they're like, oh, maybe I belong to this. So when you isolate them, that increases their anxiety, increases their depression, increases like possibility for other mental illnesses. I think also really importantly, like don't tell other people without their consent. We call this outing them. When you do that, what you're also doing is you're betraying their trust because they trusted you with this information. And now you're sort of going around and sharing it without telling them and without their consent. So those are things not to do. But other ways that you can be supportive is you can talk to your own therapist. And if you don't have one, you can find someone to talk to. You can also offer your child to like find them a therapist. That would be helpful and affirming. I understand there's also like stigma around mental health when it comes to the API community, but the therapist is there to like support you in navigating some of these things, support you, and like it probably will bring up anxiety and depression, whether it's for you or for your loved one. The therapist is there to also like support you. Um, Other ways you can be supportive is like by being there for them and asking questions such as, do you want to tell me more about yourself? Where can I learn more about this, right? What you're doing is you're being curious about their life and you want to learn more about them. And also, respect them if they don't want to share. Maybe they aren't ready. Maybe they don't feel comfortable. And that's okay. Because when you sort of allow them like their autonomy and freedom to explore, you're also building a better relationship with them. Um, yeah. So in terms of resourcing and supporting like queer and trans API youth, asking, does your school have a GSA? So that's a Gay Straight Alliance, more commonly known as Gender and Sexuality Alliance. Does it have like any ethnic or cultural clubs, right? So queer and trans API youth definitely need spaces where they can be safe in being themselves. And that is like finding other people that they can talk to about it, who have similar experience, who might have a better idea of how to navigate. And if they want to come out, that they can talk to people about this. Asking like, are there any school policies that protect LGBTQIA plus students? And if there aren't, how can we advocate for them, right? So part of it is like, if they are being discriminated against, the school is there to protect them, that you are there to support them, right? Because youth spend most of their time, when they're not at home, usually in school. And so school should also be a place where they can be safe and comfortable to be themselves. On a more bigger level, like what are the laws and policies in your city and state, right? Can you call your elected officials if there are anti-gay or anti-trans bills coming up? And if you can, vote for inclusive representation, because that is really important. And that they are there to protect your interests. Something that's also super important is to connect with other parents and families, finding a local chapter through PFLAG. So PFLAG stands for like parents and families of like queer and trans youth. So PFLAG has different chapters throughout the United States. If they don't have one where you are, you can also start one. API Rainbow Parents is a chapter through PFLAG New York City. I would recommend reaching out to them to see if they know people in your area. And if they don't, that you can start something too. And what I'm like trying to impart here is that community is extremely important because you and your loved ones do not need to figure out everything by yourselves. And that there are a lot of resources out there for you. I think the worst thing that you can do is isolate and pretend like none of this is happening when it is, and it's impacting your own mental health and your loved one's mental health. So here are some resources in terms of organizations, named NCAPIA before, API Rainbow Parents, PFLAG, there's a Trans Youth Family Allies, and then talk about mental health and wellness. And I want to point out for queer and trans youth, the Trevor Project and the Trans Lifeline. if you're feeling really down and like depressed and don't know what to do, that there are, you know, numbers that you can call or that you can text to talk to someone about these sorts of things. There's also the Asian American peer counseling. So if you want to talk to peers about it, you can do that. The Asian Mental Health Collective, the National Queer and Trans Therapists of Color Network, if you're looking for therapists, like mental health counselors. And then I have Queer Cures as sort of more inclusive wellness. So thank you for tuning in. If you want to stay connected, here's my contact information. A few social media, there's my Instagram. This is being recorded, so it will be shared, and I'm sharing these slides to Project Lotus to then share with all of you. So yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm going to turn it back to Project Lotus for the next part.
Thank you so much, Ren. I know for a lot of families, like this process is a journey, right? There's, like you said, there's so many different changing parts, and having that certainty and giving those strategies, I think, is an awesome way for people to be able to navigate this situation, whether it's for them or with their kids or with their family. So thank you. And I also know we got one question into the Q&A box, which is awesome. We'll get to that after this panelist section that's coming up. Just a quick note again, if you'd like to kind of, I guess, preload your question into the Q&A box, totally feel free using that button at the bottom. And we will definitely make time to get to all the questions towards the end to the best of our ability. But next, if we could get the Project Lotus slides up, please. I'd like to introduce our amazing panelists for today. So as always, I think the really big value in our events is being able to hear student and youth perspectives and how that kind of ties into this family dynamic and these topics and how to navigate them. So I guess I want to first start off by thanking Eli and Kai for being able to speak with us today. Being able to speak about mental health experiences alone are probably pretty daunting. So being able to speak about being queer and how it relates to your experiences, I just want to say thank you for being able to share your stories. But with that, if you'd like to turn your cameras, I'd like to just quickly introduce you all to the audience. So first is Eli. Eli is a half Japanese and half white trans upcoming senior at Sam Barlow High School located in Gresham, Oregon. They're interested and very excited to talk about challenging gender through the lens of race, especially on their experience as an Asian American. Kai Wong is currently a senior at Washington State University and studying public relations and identifies as lesbian. Coming from a Chinese ethnic background, she's excited to discuss the topic of being LGBTQ+ as Asian American. So again, thank you panelists for being able to share your experience. And I guess I'll just open up to a pretty open question. Could you please talk about your experiences and how it relates to mental health and your identity as being AAPI and queer? I guess Eli first.
For sure. Thank you so much, Daniel. So to start off, thank you everyone for being here. Even though it's not Pride Month, I think it's amazing that we're having this conversation year round. We shouldn't just end these conversations during Pride Month. We should always have this as an ignition for future conversations. So first, starting off with mental health, I think within the trans community, a large contributor to mental health declining is misgendering. And Ren has touched about this already, but we're talking about misgendering. Misgendering is a harsh reality for many trans folk when they're coming out. And this can happen on a daily basis in most situations because of the way trans folk are represented. So you may represent someone who's like a trans woman, and reifying that trauma of being assigned male at birth is quite traumatic and can increase the declining mental health for many trans folk. And when we're talking about misgendering, what's really at the root of misgendering is this binary logic between male and female. Are they a she or a he? This logic is pretty constant throughout things, and it also applies to Asian Americans. So when we're talking about binary logic, this also happens for me, for example. So I'm half Japanese, half white. And so this kind of can seem like black and white. Do I identify more American or do I identify more Japanese in some situations? So this binary logic is quite pervasive in many situations. And it also is quite legalized, for example. So on like an ID, male or female, or in my situation, when I turn 18, I have to choose between Japanese citizenship or American citizenship, as they can't really have a dual citizenship much. So this is another example of binary logic. And we can quite understand why this is harmful for many Asian Americans, as the rise of anti-Asian hate and white supremacist tendencies are due to the fact of binary logic about blaming Asian Americans for the coronavirus. And this was portrayed, for example, in a press conference with Donald Trump, where an Asian reporter was asking him about the coronavirus. And he replied back, "Why don't you talk to your country about that?" This is another example of the binary logic where Asians always have this constant, perpetual foreign status in America. And they're always blamed for any form of Chinese or Japanese or any form of Asian global politics that really aren't at the root of their control at all. And even if you are an American citizen, you're still marked as for it. This is quite xenophobic, and where we see the logics of us versus them, this kind of protecting your country against the foreigner. And this binary logic is where many Asian Americans can express solidarity with trans and queer folk who don't always identify with male or female. The same how Asian Americans, especially growing up, even if you are 100% Asian, you still are a conglomerate of your experiences. You're not just from China and you live in America, but rather you're a conglomerate of your environments. If you live in a Hispanic community, you're going to be a product of that experience and gaining from that culture. So this binary logic is really at the heart of what we're talking about, and why when we're talking about misgendering, we should really focus on always, of course, asking about your pronouns first, but also using not binary logic. So using they, them pronouns, which are gender neutral. And these are great steps we can have in our everyday environment where we can kind of challenge this logic. And even in the trans community, for example, there is immense variability. A common understanding of trans folk is trans man or a trans woman. You were assigned female at birth and then you transition into a man. But that's not always the case. Many people, for example, identify as non-binary, and many trans women and trans men don't take hormones and don't require surgery or don't need that. And that's another form of variability. So when we kind of come down to the question of having a trans child, for example, there are a lot of questions about how do I go about the process of hormones? How do I go the process about surgery? And that's not always required in many situations. And what can become dangerous is enforcing a checklist. I know with trans children, there is like, oh, then you automatically need surgery, you automatically need XYZ. And it's really variable on each person. Some people don't need that. So it's always important to have communication and seeing what your child needs most, because what can become dangerous is streamlining what trans means to everyone. And that's where this normalization of it can become dangerous in terms of why it's not even like, it's reifying this binary logic where you're no longer trans, but rather when you're growing up as a trans woman, for example, as a child, you could do early transition, which can be dangerous in terms of stripping away the trans identity that you have, and then just reifying the binary logic, which for many folk, that does not apply. So at the end of it, we should look at trans experiences and Asian American experiences as not a one size fits all. That's really the root cause of what we're talking about and this binary logic. And so what to do is really to listen to your child and not project any of your pre-existing understanding, and rather come from a place of understanding that there is immense variability, and what may not work for them may work for someone else. So with that, I'll pass it back off to Daniel.
Thanks, Eli. Yeah, and I think what you said really resonated with me was how it's not a one size fit mold, right? How this experience is not, meant to be streamlined as a once you go through this experience, you'll recognize this, and your kids should have to do this. And I think that's a good message, really, for anyone to hear, regardless if you're AAPI, an ally, belongs to the LGBTQ community. But yeah, thank you. And I guess next, Kai, if you'd like to share experiences similarly just to the topics that we're talking about with today's webinar.
Yeah, I would like to thank everyone who is participating here as well. So a little bit of a background on myself is my name is Kai Wong. As y'all saw on the earlier side, I am, my pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm currently attending Washington State University as a public relations major, and a few positions I have right now are, I'm involved in a sorority. I'm also involved in a lot of multicultural communities. For example, I am the president of a lot of multicultural clubs and organizations, and that really helps educate me in a lot of these topics as well. And so let's starting off, I was never as educated as I am now, and we all start from somewhere, right? And so please understand that it is okay to make mistakes and to essentially not understand one subject or another, but to learn, and that we're all here to learn, and we're all here to essentially understand more about different subjects and whatnot. And so as Eli was talking about everything being binary, I definitely resonated with that with intersectionality. I want to bring up the importance of intersectionality, especially being a minority here in America. So I assume that a lot of us can relate to being Asian American here in America, that we come from Asian descent and cultural backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds from that cultural standpoint. However, we are also American citizens, or we reside here in America. And so in that sense, together, we are Asian Americans. And that very much relates to this topic here as being AAPI, but also in the LGBTQ community. And I also want to talk about how intersectionality is essentially very important, because as we grow up here in this society, unfortunately, we have different experiences, right? Growing up as Asian, unfortunately, we have to essentially face discrimination, racial discrimination, whether that's gender discrimination, whatever that is, we face discrimination compared to our more privileged counterparts. And with that being said, I think a lot of our children growing up, especially from these backgrounds, struggle with that. And parents who come here to America really give everything, and they sacrifice so much in order to provide a better life for their children. And that's why this is so important to talk about, because growing up as an Asian American child, I remember wanting to essentially seek my parents' approval. And that is what we want almost more than anything, is to make our parents proud. Because as we grow up, as we move on to the teenage stage, or to an age where we're more understanding of the reasons why our parents do whatever that they do to provide for us, we start to understand the consequences that follow along. And so, for an example, we work hard in school and we do well so we can get these good jobs and get that financial security so we live a good life, right? And that's something that our parents never really had the chance to do, or they had to give up a lot more compared to us. And essentially, children seek that approval and they seek that love and support. And it's so much more heavy because of this minority that essentially is labeled upon us. We struggle to find jobs. It's harder for us because there's that factor. There's that racial factor, or even that homophobia factor. And so what I ask for parents to really open up and see is that your children here, they really need your love and support. Because if you think about it, in life, there is not much you can control. You can't control if someone is going to be racist towards you or homophobic towards you. However, you can control how you raise your children, and you can control how you teach them how to face the world. And it is a scary world out there. And so the best you can do is really raise them with love and support, and to provide them all the necessary skills needed to essentially take on the world. And that's where the trust comes in, is to be able to trust that your children has been raised and been taught all of these different essentially skills and wisdom so they are able to face the world. And that is where the LGBTQ element comes in as well, is that these intersectionality does not make them weak or any less, rather makes them strong, because they will go through so many different experiences. And through those experiences, they will learn how to be better, how to be stronger, and how to face the world as individuals. And because of that, they're going to be facing so much hate in the world already. They do not need an environment at home where they don't feel accepted and supported. It is heartbreaking to see children go out and essentially seek outreach somewhere else, to seek acceptance and approval somewhere else outside of their own family members, because that is a core element to how they'll succeed and how they'll essentially do mental wise. And I know that Ren definitely went through a lot of the statistics regarding mental health within children and within LGBTQI youth. And I know Eli talked about the binary concept, with how essentially we are a combination of a ton of other elements. And so I highly encourage parents to not only obviously learn about that, essentially that logical and statistics part of our society, but also understand and I encourage you all to be more open, to listen to your children, to see what they need, because everyone is different. Every family will be different. Every dynamic will be different, and really show them that support. It's okay if you don't understand everything. We're never going to learn everything, but please be open and listen to your child to provide that trust and to provide that safe environment where they are able to grow. Because once they take on the world outside of this familial circle, essentially this bubble, they're going to need those skills. They're going to need to learn how to essentially be strong out there and to essentially take on the world themselves. And so I highly encourage you all to be open and to listen to your children with learning that intersectionality and all the parts that make up who we are is what makes us beautiful and what makes us amazing. And that's what's going to make them succeed. Rather it be their downfall. It will be what builds them up. So I hope that answers a bit of the question. I know I went on a bit of a tangent there, but yeah.
No worries. Yeah, no, thank you for sharing, I guess, both your experience, but also kind of your, what really resonated with me too was that point about support. Like often most of us won't even understand what this experience is like fully, but being able to be open and creating that environment, at least at home, is one step. Yeah. Thank you, panelists, for sharing. And I know I'm sure like there's a couple questions people will have. We had some questions in the pre-registration form as well. So if Ren, you'd like to kind of join us back again, I think we'll just kind of go straight into our Q&A discussion. So this is something we don't normally do, but if you'd like to actually call in per se, you can raise your hand with the raise hand button at the bottom. And I think what we could do with this event is actually just allow you to ask the question directly. If that's something you'd prefer not to do and you just want to also text in a message, please use the Q&A box. But one question we got during Ren's section was, so this person prefaced by saying, sorry for being new to this, but I'm confused about one's identity might be changing over time. So does this mean people's identities change or they're just looking for a change? What does this mean? So panelists or Ren, would you like to take?
Yeah, I can answer that since it was sort of, well, I can start answering it if people want to jump in, go for it. What I meant by that is that we live in a world where we are assumed that most people are straight, that most people are cis. And so, for example, if you're a woman, that you're being told that you need to have a relationship with a man, right? And we live in a society, we have media that tells us this all the time. And so that's kind of confusing for someone who might be like, oh, I'm not sure, like, do I actually like men, or like, is it okay if that I like women? And maybe initially they're like, you know, maybe I am bisexual. Maybe I do like men and women and people of other genders. And, you know, people are going through life, you're going through school, you're trying to figure out work, you're trying to figure out all these other things. In the meantime, like, you're like, okay, maybe I am bisexual. And then maybe like 5 years down the line, you start dating or like whatever, and you're like, oh shit, maybe I don't like, oh, sorry for my language, by the way, but that's how I am as a therapist also. You know, maybe I don't like men. Maybe I was just like kind of confused that I thought that I had to like men. And so actually, like, I think I'm a lesbian, you know, and that happens for people because as we grow up, as we change, we meet new people. As like, you know, many of us like sometimes leave our hometown, we go to college in another state or another city, meet more people, and like we run into people that have different identities or like have ones that we've never heard of. We get to explore, we get to figure that out. That like, yeah, sometimes it does change through time. Not that it necessarily changes, but that we're learning about ourselves. We're getting new language to like to and new labels to sort of understand like, oh, I thought I was this before, but actually I'm this other thing. And that's kind of cool and that's kind of okay. And I hope that the people around me can love and support me through that. So I hope that sort of answers that question.
Panelists, would you want to maybe add on with your own experiences?
For sure. I have a couple things to add real quick. I think the environment is so true. Like we are a product of our environment. We are where we are surrounded by it. Like if you grew up in Wyoming and then you move to New York, I think that environmental change will contribute to what you are aware of. And then also, I think there's a lot of internalization of homophobia for queer folk. You know, we grow up in a society that may disregard or have hateful tendencies to queer folk. And so if you are a queer person and you aren't even aware of that, there's so much internalization that it takes time. Many trans folk, for example, came out in their 40s or 50s because there's so much internalization of anti-trans legislation, i.e. like cross-dressing laws in the 50s and 60s. Those forms of internalization and hate for so many folk is why later in life, that's when they can really be authentic. But in the beginning stages, it's a bit more fragile and harder to understand those things.
Awesome. Yeah. Kai, did you have anything to add? Totally okay if not.
No, I definitely agree with what Ren and Eli has said. Once again, as we grow, right, throughout life, we will learn about different elements and stages of ourselves. Like when I was, for an example, 12 years old, I thought I absolutely loved the medicine. And I mean, I still am fascinated by it, but I learned that medicine is not necessarily for me. To all the Asian parents, please do not frown upon that, of course, but that doesn't necessarily negate my worth, right? It just means that I essentially am more aware of a different aspect of my life. And I am still who I am. I'm just learning a little bit more. It's essentially, we are all a mosaic of who we are as a person. And so therefore, just because maybe your child will say that, oh, I think I'm bisexual at this age. And then at a later age will say, I'm actually a lesbian or I'm gay or whatever that is, or I am non-binary. Then essentially that isn't really who they are. Like they're not changing essentially who they are, but they're more so discovering a part of who they are. And now they're more comfortable with sharing that. And so this kind of branches back to what I was saying with the love and support is that in the end, we are all essentially living on a rock, right? And what is so important is to have that familial love and that support. And they're essentially just really being more comfortable with sharing that part of themselves with you. And this is where we encourage you all to really be open and hear them out, because it's very important to have that support and to sustain that relationship. So yeah, I would just essentially say they're not really changing. They're just learning more about themselves. And now they're more comfortable, because you might never know. They might actually have known this the entire time, but now they're finally becoming more comfortable and gotten to a stage where they're confident in themselves and they're confident in expressing that. So there's definitely a lot of different reasons for that, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that was a great way to put it. And I think this question ties into a lot of parents may not be able to fathom, right? Coming to terms with your own identity and what that even looks like. Because for a lot of us, that is just, okay, we're born and we are like cis, straight, and that's just how it is. And then maybe people's perception is, oh, okay, one day they realize they're not. But we know that that's not so black and white, not that binary logic like Eli mentioned. So to whatever degree you're comfortable, and maybe just to help people who are still trying to understand what that looks like, panelists or speakers, like what was that experience for you? How did like that collection of experiences over time contribute to you being able to come to terms and recognize your own identity? Is there any notable experiences, notable things you saw, heard, and would you like to share with the audience?
I could start on that one. I think for me, growing up, I know representation, we all talk about it, but it is like such a major thing. And especially for queer and trans folk, you see like representation maybe in like a cartoon, like maybe there's like a queer like person there. But like seeing real people, I know like there's a lot of amazing Netflix documentaries. But for me, I think having like queer and trans like adults and like elders who like you can look up to is a major difference. And seeing their journey and understanding and getting to know them on like an intimate level is really how you can like understand their coming about and their journey and like understanding and reliving that to yourself. So I think really kind of just like expanding your horizon, because like as a kid I wouldn't know what cis or trans or non-binary meant, so discovering those things was such like a game changer.
Anyone else like to add on to that with their own experiences?
Yeah, I would like to add, I mean, I am in college right now, so that's a little background, but honestly, in high school, I had absolutely no idea what any of those phrases meant, any of those labels meant. And that's completely okay. It's more so on education that really helped as well, is that the more exposed I am coming to college, I was able to really learn more, and not even just in LGBTQ spaces, but now we're kind of advancing towards trying to be more inclusive in all communities, right? So even in multicultural spaces, in other certain spaces, they are trying to be more aware of that and more inclusive in that sense. And because I started immersing myself in those environments, I started learning and educating myself. College now being such a source of education, right, has been teaching us students that these are certain elements that we should learn about. And yeah, I learned a lot through college and taking classes, and just even through professors, a lot of notable sources and credibility coming from that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So it's kind of, oh, Randy.
Yeah. I just want to like add to what folks are saying about like, I mean, I grew up in New York City, and so I've always been like surrounded by all sorts of people, which has been cool. But even then, like, there's only so much that I could know. And you know, I definitely learned a lot when I went to college, and then like post college. It's all about like meeting people, finding relationships with people. I always say like I really came into my identity maybe like 7 years ago or something at this point. And even then, like I'm still figuring it out. Like it's still a journey to figure it out because things are changing, the world is shifting, and like my sense of who I am is also shifting. And then I don't know if it will ever end. And I'm okay with that. And I have people in my life, I have my friends, my family who support me. And so honestly, that's kind of like all I need at this point. And what I continue to do is like I be myself, and I surround myself with the people who love and care about me.
Those are all great ways to kind of put that into perspective. Um, and I know for parents too, for kids who are part of the LGBTQ community, is that there can be a lot of uncertainty, right? Especially if a child chooses not to come out to their parents, but parents may wonder about what's going on. And especially, I guess that kind of becomes more of a social situation when parents maybe don't understand as much about what that looks like. So do you all have any advice to maybe the mental health side of things for parents in this experience, in this process? And any advice for them?
Yeah, I guess I can start. So coming from, of course, a minority and Asian American cultural background, of course, we have a lot of traditional beliefs, a lot of conservative, certain beliefs on what is right and what's wrong, right? So I know growing up, being straight was the right path to go. And that was the only path. Everything else was a taboo. Everything else was non-existent, essentially. And so being surrounded in that environment can be very detrimental to parents, especially growing up with those beliefs. And especially, when you're surrounded with a lot of other people who hold those beliefs, it can be hard to support your child when you yourself are struggling to essentially see that. And so what I would encourage parents to do is to seek other parents or seek other peers that are going through the same thing or have gone through the same thing, and seek more knowledge, constantly try to learn. And of course, on top of listening to your kid, is to talk to other adults, right? To talk to other peers, other people that you trust. And that is a very big thing, because in our certain cultures, we do have those beliefs. And unfortunately, those beliefs are extremely contradicting to our who we are, our identities. And so I highly encourage you all to find folks who come from a similar background, or parents, other adults who come from a similar background, who have experienced what you have experienced, whether that is build a support system, build essentially a community that you can ask questions about, and of course with other queer folks as well. And so, and for children, your mental health matters a lot. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out to different resources. Of course, I would highly recommend finding your own community as well, because going through this learning about your own identity is a journey. And it can be a very scary journey, but I encourage you all that it is all worth it, because you being your authentic self is the most important. You only have one life. Why would you ever want to imitate someone else, right? You're just as important and just as special. And you are here to, if you have a purpose, if you believe in that, I mean, you are essentially here to make an impact. And you can only make certain impacts being exactly who you are. You can't necessarily do that copying someone else, like a celebrity. I don't think I'll be able to impact someone if, for an example, if I think I'm Selena Gomez, right? So you're special just the way you are. And I highly encourage you all to seek those support systems and whatnot.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think too, something like sentiment we picked up with past events too is how there's a lot of the uncertainty of parents. They wonder like, is my child being part of the LGBTQ community like something I could have done differently, right? And I think that's an important thing to emphasize too. Is like it's not your fault, and it's there. With that being said, there's things we can do, regardless of our parents or youth or allies, that we can take those steps to be better support systems. So yeah, absolutely. We had a question, I guess a follow-up to the question about identity changing over time. If identity can be changed over time, which might imply one's identity might be changed back to one's assigned identity, then what if there has been done some irreversible changes already? Or am I just too paranoid?
Yes, you're being paranoid. I'll answer that for you. It's also your own anxiety coming up about what if and what if. And I promise you that people don't make decisions lightly, that people don't arbitrarily say, I think I want to be on hormones, or I think I want surgery. That people go through a whole process. They do their own research. Like the amount of Googling that I have done for myself and for other people is a lot. I'll never get those hours back. People talk to other people. The reason why they want to do it is because they've talked to other people who've gone through it, right? And they weigh the pros and the cons for themselves. You don't know how hormones may change you, and that's okay. There are some things that are expected, some things that are sort of unexpected. People often, when they choose to go on it, they take all of it, right? Yeah, and I think to answer your question, yeah, you are being paranoid because it's your anxiety that's coming up. And so like, how do you also handle your own anxiety, right? I think really talk to the person about like, how do you make an informed decision that you want to do something, right? Let's talk over like, what are the possibilities? Like what will change? Like what doesn't change, right? And how do I support this person if they want to go through with this? And I think it's important to connect with like a, affirming therapist for yourself and for your child. And like, if you need to go to family therapy, like that is an option too, that they're sort of also answering the previous question, that there are resources out there for you, for your child, for your family, and that you won't be alone in sort of understanding and navigating this. And I think as like time goes and maybe more and more resources are being translated into different languages. So that is also there for you.
Absolutely, yeah. And I know too, for a lot of parents, maybe this process involves a lot of more communication with youth and being able to talk more about these topics with the youth, of course, if they're comfortable with talking about it. But these topics can also be maybe a little intimidating for people who haven't had these conversations before. So maybe Ren, if you had strategies, or panelists, if you've noticed things that have worked and haven't worked, what are ways that families can increase that communication to talk more about these topics and both foster that support as well as just be able to be transparent to whatever degree you're comfortable with?
I can start real quick. Also, just to touch on the last question very briefly, when we're talking about reversibility, I know for trans men and trans women, taking hormones, you can like stop taking hormones at some point and have like gametes reproduce. So there are some like reversible parts of hormones itself. Many trans women are able to like produce children. Like there's many trans couples who have kids biologically. So there are some challenges there that can be fixed. So when talking about this question, I think a fun thing to do is watch a trans or queer movie. Like watch a movie that's like about like a trans character or a queer character and have a conversation. I think bringing those like organic conversation, maybe like Schitt's Creek on Netflix. That's a fun gay TV show on Netflix that can have like organic conversations that can spur those really important ones that can be a bit daunting to bring up to your child to independently be accountable for. So having those organic conversations are much easier to engage with, I think.
Would anyone else like to add anything?
Yeah, I want to add that when you bring it up, that you're not also bringing up judgment, right? That you're able to talk in a way that isn't judgmental, that isn't, maybe that isn't just out of like fear also, which, I understand the person asking this question, and I think part of it is come from fear, comes from like worry about your child, right? And that is your own anxiety that it's coming up about this person, right? And so how do you have a conversation where like your anxiety isn't like the focus of it, that the person that you're trying to like talk to about this isn't only just trying to like reassure you that like what they're doing is like what they think is best for them, because to have a conversation is like, yeah, to like center actually the person who's going to be going through this change. Like I just want to name that also for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. So it seems like Eli kind of gave a nice organic way to get those conversations going. And Ren, you had kind of that thing to keep in the back of the mind when getting that conversation going. Eli, I actually really like that strategy because that's something we at Project Lotus, you probably heard us say this before, it's like a strategy for talking about mental health is like talking about some media or someone who's like, very prominent in media and starts to open up about their experiences. That can be just that organic way to say, hey, what do you think about that? It can be a little less intimidating. So just thought I'd say that really resonated with me too. Also, would you want to drop Schitt's Creek, the spelling, into the all panelists and attendees chat in case anyone wants to check it out? Awesome. I have not watched it, but I have friends recommend it. So sounds like a good show. Let's see. We had some also pre-submitted questions I thought I'd get to. One of which is, so I think this applies to mental health professionals in general, also outside of the API community, is there's a lot of misunderstanding of the role therapy plays in people's lives and what the role mental health professionals play, and how, some people, for example, think therapy is only for when you have some serious challenges that you need someone to guide you through, and that's not the case, right? So I guess I'll make this a general question to panelists and Ren as well. Either if you'd like to talk about what that role professional advice plays, whether it's like specific people who specialize in LGBTQ plus clients, or maybe panelists, your experiences with that, if you have had experience with professionals, is what role they play in your own mental health in these experiences.
Yeah, I can start. We're not here to tell you what to do. I think that is, a misconception. Like if you come in therapy, I am not here to tell you what to do because I don't live your life. I just don't know it. I can listen to it. I can provide some sort of like feedback and advice and support, but that I can't just tell you what to do. And also ideally you come to therapy before like you hit rock bottom, because it takes time to find a therapist that will fit you. It will take time to set up that consultation to like see if you actually like the person that you want to talk to. It takes time. And so like, I don't want you to try to go to therapy when you're like feeling already super bad and like suicidal or something like that. That ideally like therapy is meant to be preventative than it is just to be like a reactionary thing. I just want to like put that out there. That like also therapists will have their own opinions, and that's why I also recommend going to like affirming therapists, because there are people, therapists are human beings too. They have their own opinions, their own thoughts, and it's not going to be helpful for you or your child if you go to someone who will tell you that like, yeah, maybe you're right and your child is wrong, because that person doesn't know your child, person doesn't know you, and they shouldn't be telling you what to do. And if they are, you should probably find someone else to talk to. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add on to that quickly. I think finding those affirming therapists is a bit better now with the online platform. I know there's a lot of digital therapists and a lot of ways to seek out queer and trans therapists who are very specializing in that nature. So I think, especially now more than ever, the strategy prevention is the best way to go. I think that's always, as Ren mentioned, that's the best way to navigate therapy. And also try out those like online like meetings. I think those can be really beneficial, and can be a great substitute if you are financially burdened for more in-person meetings.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's worth noting too, like I think a concept people also don't understand is that there are these professionals who are affirming and specialize in certain areas, and there are family therapists, and there are therapists like Ren who focus on the LGBTQ community. And there are these professionals. I know there's some people have qualms with like Psychology Today, but there are these platforms that you can find these professionals, and really see if the therapy is a fit for you. And I think Ren put it great. Like, it's not a reactionary solution; it can be preventative.
I
I
also
guess
just want to quickly name that like therapy is typically maybe around 45 to 55 minutes a week. All right. So like if you're expecting to go to therapy once a week for about an hour and that will fix your problems, that is not going to happen. So I also want you to be realistic. The therapy in itself is a process that will take time. Therapy is not a fix it. It is in sort of understanding and processing work. And that it can be really painful, it can be really hard, and it can bring up a lot of things. But that ultimately it will be really helpful in the long term, just so you can understand like what's coming up for you when you're talking to your loved ones, and what's coming up for you when you're just interacting with folks in general.
absolutely. I think we can take one or two more questions. So I guess kind of on the flip side, I know we've been talking a lot about family dynamics and for API families, what to expect, parents, some strategies, ways to get that conversation organically going. For any youth or students who might see this recording, panelists, do you have any advice for them, coming from your own personal experiences?
I think finding peers, going to a GSA, finding people online. If you're ever like questioning whoever you are, whatever you are, I think finding people who are also questioning or are more resolved in their identity is so beneficial. And also if you can like reach out to those communities or even like a Discord server, like those little like where you don't feel so isolated, especially in quarantine, like social distancing, that can be a major difference. And I don't know, I also would think about experimenting more as a youth person. There is so much like barriers, like materially, but also internally. There can be so much like, do I look good in this shirt? Do I not look good with this hairstyle? So looking at yourself and being very retrospective can be a major difference that in the long term can help you in more ways than you can imagine currently.
I just thought I'd check in. Did you have anything you'd like to share?
Not really. I second everything Eli said.
Awesome. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I guess something else I would say is like kind of adding on top of that, just essentially seeking a support system. And also another very important thing is surrounding yourself with the right people. So the people who will be supportive and accepting and open to your questions or your curiosity on your identity, whatever that is seeking that support system and seeking a system that will be ultimately be there for you and help potentially guide you through everything. And even if not, just people there, right? Like that's very important to establish a safe and secure support system. And then on top of that, I do really want to express to not be afraid to be yourself. And I understand we come from a ton of different backgrounds from everywhere else. And at times it may be hard at different geographical areas. It may definitely be hard, but to appreciate that and to be okay with being yourself. And you might not need to show it outwardly, right? But inside, build and foster that relationship with yourself and understand that I am a growing person, I am changing, and regardless of whatever I may identify as or go through, to learn and accept that a part of yourself. We tend to go through a lot of internalized homophobia, so that is something that I definitely want to bring up as well. And essentially not to be afraid to explore and dive deeper within yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I see Ren's typing up an answer to a question in the chat. So I guess we can wrap things up with a final question to everyone. So panelists first, give Ren that moment to answer the question. Could you just give kind of a, if you were to give a final quick word of advice, support to anyone in the audience, parents, students, educators, professionals, anything, what would that kind of final advice be in relation to today's topics, mental health, being LGBT, and AAPI?
Okay, that's like a big one. I think experimentation, I think with communication, I think not being afraid of, don't be like bound up in what you think things might be. Like we obviously have preconceived notions of what queer or trans might be, or just like what our parents will react to us. But I think talking about it, having upfront communication, surrounding yourself with people who are open to you. I think the biggest thing is just experimenting, honestly. I think you won't be like resolved in all of your decisions, and that's okay. You need to surround yourself with people who will be okay with you experimenting with yourself and with others, and just that form is where you will grow in the future. And for parents, I think being accepting with whatever decisions your child makes that are in their best interest, and always being there for them, even though they themselves are going through massive amounts of journeys inside themselves and also externally. So I think experimentation, communication is always key. Yeah, I think like always have the best interest and well-being of your child at hand, and know that what they're doing is like right for themselves. And yeah.
Additionally, I want to add on top of that, for parents, please understand that at some point you need to learn to trust, that your child knows what's best for them, because only they really know what's going on inside of their own heads and whatnot. And so if you do have a child that comes out and you don't necessarily feel as if, oh, this is not what my child is, like, please be open and listen, because ultimately they will know what's best for themselves at a certain point. And so please just be open to that and learn to trust that they know what's best for them, especially in terms of potentially identity. And it's okay if their identity changes, but just be open and loving and supportive. And that's really all they need is that love and support and trust.
Yeah, and I will say that, whatever your child or whatever you are going through, you're not going through it alone. That there are other people out there, that there are resources out there, and that you don't need to figure it all out. And it's okay if you don't understand all of it, right? The best thing that you can do is just to listen, is to support them, be like, I love you, I care for you, I want to support you. I don't have any idea what I'm doing sometimes, but let me know if I need to do something better. Yeah, and then try it and do it. We're human, we make mistakes, and we just keep on learning, and we keep on figuring things out. And then there are so many resources out there, professionally, and also like PureWise and like other families. Yeah, you can find them, or they will find you.
Awesome. Well, thank you, panelists. Thank you, Ren. If we could get the last slide up to wrap up the event, then that'd be awesome. Great. All right, so that concludes our webinar. Thank you so much to Ren for coming to share your expertise and experience today, as well as panelists Eli and Kai for giving your own experiences and putting some kind of shining a little more light on this topic. And I hope this was helpful to the audience. Again, this will be completely recorded. Ren's slides will be, I don't think we answered this when the person who brought it up left, but the slides will be distributed. I think we can send it through our follow-up email that we always send with these events. The recording will also be in that follow-up email and on our website. So if all else fails and you can't find any of the things you're looking for with this event, check out our website. It'll be all there. But with that, thank you so much, everyone, for attending. Again, here's just some of those things if you want to check us out: our socials, website, email. If you want to email us some questions, is info@contactprojectlotus.org. It's also on our website. But with that, hope this was useful to everyone, and thank you for coming.